welcome. Thank you for joining this webinar. We're going to go through this probably in 20-30 minutes and hopefully leave room for questions. Kristen is going to moderate for us. I am Scott Stevens. I am COO and VP of Sales for Argenteel. With me is Jason, and he will be going through a demo of our solution. I'm going to run through slides fairly quickly. I'll go fairly fast. If there are some hand raises, I want to stop to see if there's anything that we want to discuss. But really what the slides are about is providing an overview of who we are, what we're doing, and what our solution does to automate deployment of technologies in a pretty significant, I would say, unique way. And really, it's the slides are to set up the demonstration, which is about really showcasing how we do this. For one particular example, we'll get into that. So thanks for joining. We are in the business of script discovery, capture, and reuse. And it's really about trying to capture an organization's hidden intellectual properties, which are in scripts. We distinguish between code and scripts, and we'll kind of get into that, but it's really about your Python, your PowerShell, your Bash scripts that your teams use to implement and deploy technologies. And so if we talk about, I just want to sort of level set on the landscape, but kind of an known secret that apps and technology stacks are still deployed and updated with scripts. Whether that's any of these technologies and many more, but Microsoft, Cisco, AWS, whether you're talking about cloud or on-prem, network security, you name it, scripts are still utilized heavily to deploy many of these technologies. They're not really easy or simple to reuse. They're usually rewritten from scratch. They're usually maintained by either your employees or your consultants, and they kind of use them and then they're gone. In some cases, many folks do use GitHub or Bitbucket as repositories, but it's very hard to sort of reuse those. And there's a lot of hand editing or manual editing that goes into it. So we're going to show you how we automate that process. And then, of course, we'll talk about languages a lot. But whether you're using Python, PowerShell, or Bash, or Perl, or anything else, or existing automation tools like Ansible or Terraform, many of these languages are difficult. We know YAML is used in some of these, and a lot of it's dictated by the technology, but some of it's dictated by the engineer's preference. We help take that out of play, making agnostic language behavior. So our tool handles up to 20 languages today. We've added more based on our customer preferences. So the two questions we set out to ask were, what if you can capture hidden script intellectual property? And then more importantly, what if you could standardize processes and reuse scripts and significantly reduce deployment hours and time? That's really what it's all about. So with that, I'm looking for questions.
Let Jason
yes.
in. Let Jason in.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Steve. Okay, so what is Ascot, or what is Argenteel, right? Our Argenteel solution suite is made up of two pieces. One is Ascot, which is our automated script capture and organization tool. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this. It's included in the tool, but we're going to spend more time on Adept. But what Ascot does briefly is discover scripts within an organization. It'll go out and crawl, and it'll aggregate, organize, and analyze scripts. We apply machine learning and AI to be able to sort of analyze what's in the script. So we do deep content inspection of the script. We can tell you what platform, what type of operating system it applies to, what technology it applies to, and language, of course. That's what Ascot does. Again, we're going to spend most of our time on Adept, which is our adaptive deployment tool. And we'll get into that here in a second. But just a quick visual of where we fit in the world in which we live. And a lot of this is in the DevOps side, the ops side of DevOps, although it sort of extends into the dev side. But whether it's any of these operating systems or these cloud platforms, not limited to cloud, it actually works on-prem as well. Any of these technologies, anywhere that scripts are utilized to deploy technology, we are relevant. And then across multiple languages. And basically we can help deploy any technology with one methodology. And it's really about the methodology. It's important to standardize processes amongst your team. If you have 5 engineers completing the same task, it's almost certain that they're doing it 5 different ways, right? That is inefficient. It's ineffective. If you can standardize that process, you make life a lot more simple. And if you have experts who can help write the standardization of the process, you can have, let's say, the need for less experts to actually do the deployment. And that's a big value to what we're going to show you how we share golden copies across teams. So a little more detail on Adept. We start with raw scripts, or you start with your raw scripts, the scripts that you own in the organization. And from that, you build libraries. When we say build libraries, you'll see it. Jason will show you how we're going to parse script. We're going to break it into its components, its commands versus variables versus values. And then we allow for those libraries to be built into workflows to complete a task, allowing for the reuse of scripts. It's mostly for the most common and standardized of your tasks. If it's one time, you're probably not going to want to use our system for it. But for those that are common and repetitive, right? Updating a server, implementing or deploying switches across a network, building virtual machines that are, let's say, in some ways standardized. We use any scripting language. We do variable substitution for dynamic targets. And of course, the benefits are many, not the least of which is saving time for your organization and capturing intellectual property. Again, it might be in GitHub for your organization, but can you use it again? Can you find it again? Can you sort of make it part of your process is the big question. So now's the time I'm going to flop it over to Jason in a minute. I got 2 more slides left, but what we're going to show you in this demonstration is deploying 12 Docker containers on Azure. Now that 12 number could be N number, could be 1, could be 10, could be 100, could be 1,000. And what I want you to think about is, while this might not be in your lane of expertise or technology, wherever you're using scripts, this will be relevant. Okay, so you might not be deploying VMs or Docker containers on Azure, but if you are, like I said, upgrading a server or redoing configurations or deploying any other technologies where scripts are used, this can be your solution. In the case of this example, there's about 8 steps that are required. You've got to do all these things. You've got to create a resource group. You got to create a subnet. You got to create a NIC, etc., in order to deploy a Docker container on Azure. We're going to do it once. Jason's going to do it once. Even for an expert, doing this once manually with your own scripts might take 10 or 20 minutes. You have to wait. You have to sort of provision all these types of things. If you're doing it N times, it's going to be N times 10 minutes maybe. So with us, it's automation. We automate it. It takes minutes. It's reusable and repeatable. Again, it allows non-experts to complete the task using data from a spreadsheet or a CSV. Again, Jason's going to show you that. But in this case, what you'll see in the demo is we're going to build a Greenfield Azure group from scratch, from zero, and then show you that it works. And then he's going to show you how we take that and build with like 1 or 2 clicks, we can build N number of that same sort of task. Okay. So with that, it's the end of my presentation. Now you'll hear Jason go through our demo. Let me see. See if I can do this effectively. So Jason, I'm making you host. Change host.
All right, thank you.
You are on.
Go ahead and share my screen here.
Any questions so far, Kristen, or are we good?
We're good so far.
Okay, thank you.
So hello, everybody. I'm Jason McDaniel from Argenteel, and I'm going to go through the tool with y'all and show y'all a little example here. So first here is the sign in, sign up. And the sign up is pretty simple. You just give the email and we'll give you a code and you'll be able to put that code in and you'll be able to get in. So we're going to do basically a sandboxy cooking show kind of idea here. So I've got some stuff that's already pre-baked, but we're going to go through the process of the individual scripts. But first, let's take a look at the tool. So at the top here, you'll see the different buttons. So from left to right, these two relate to the Adept tool itself. So you have your private repository right here, which contains all of your scripts, libraries, and workflows. And then you have a shared repository, which we'll get to at the end. But this allows you to share basically your libraries and your workflows to everybody inside your organization. And those that have admin access within the tool will be able to set up groups and access to those groups so that people can share between each other with the different scripts and libraries that you've created. Then we have the Ascot piece, which we're not going to go into that during this, but we're going to primarily focus on the Adept tool. So let's go to the left. So back to these pieces again. So the scripts piece, these are the raw scripts that you import in and parse. And then once we parse it, we're going to librarize it, which will show that process here in just a little bit. And then you use those libraries in order to create workflows. And the workflows is basically the steps that it takes in order to accomplish a task with your scripts. So let's go through this. So I'm going to go ahead and upload some files here, for our example here. And I'm going to pull in two different files. There we go. So I have two Python files here to demonstrate the different types of files that we support right now. And I just double click on the file, it'll load up. And so here's my script. I'm going to go ahead and click parse. What that's going to do is it's going to provide me this little screen here. And that's basically parsing out the variables as well as their values. And I wrote this script, so I know which variables that I would want to change from a run to run. And the first two here are basically ones that I never want to change. These are basically just hard-coded values. They will never change. So I'm going to mark them as don't cares because this code in here is never going to change. But these three down here could change. So the place that the location that I'm placing the Azure deployments, and then the group names, as well as the IP names and stuff like that. So the naming conventions in Azure that I'm going to be using, those could definitely change. So I go down here to the right to click merge. That's going to pop up another screen. So on the left here is the original script over here. And on the right-hand side is our libratized version of it. So you can see we put placeholders here for those values. And we have some highlighting here in here as well. So you know exactly which lines got affected with our merging process. And you can see that the first two lines here that I marked as don't care, they basically didn't get touched at all. And they're exactly what I want. But this is an iterative process. So you can hit this return to modify button. And you can do more checking, see which ones that you want to keep, which ones you don't want to keep. But in this case, this is good for us. So I'm going to go ahead and save it. And so I'm going to save this. Once this is done, let me look over at libraries real quick. So we'll see that this is now a library that I can now use in workflows. But there's another type of file that is of use for this demonstration, which is a dependency file. So here we have this import Azure Utils file, which is this one. Now I need to have this as a library, but it's not a script that runs. So I still need to go through the process of parsing it. And this one's going to take a little bit longer because this is a larger file. But once it does come back here, we're going to see the exact same variables and their values. And in this case here, this is everything in this file I want to be the same. So I'm going to go to the very top left here and mark everything as a read-only or don't care. But I do need to change the type. So right now it's set to script by default. I need to go down here and set it as a dependency. So this will make sure that the script comes along for the ride, but it's not actually executed in the workflow. So I'm going to go through the same process of merging it. Now, if I go through this and scroll it down, you'll see there's no highlighting here, so it didn't touch anything in this file. And that's exactly what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and save this. And this is going to take a little bit longer just because it's a little bit bigger file. But once this comes back, we're now going to have two libraries in here of two different types of file, a script and a utility, dependency, sorry. So now we have these two libraries. So let's start using these. So for us to use it, I'm going to go over to my other account, which has all of these files already ingested and libratized. They're already in here, ready to go to create a new workflow. So I'm going to go down here to the Workflows tab, and we're going to create our new workflow. So I go over to the plus to create our new workflow. So I got a nice blank canvas. And I'm going to start putting my libraries in here. What I like to do is go with my dependencies first. So I'm going to just click and drag those in. So I have both of my utilities dependency files here, and they come up as red in our tool so that they are differentiated between the other scripts. And we're going to go through the steps to create the Azure Greenfield. So we're going to start that off. And to do that, I need to have a resource group, the network security group, the VNets, and the subnets. So these 4 scripts are basically setting up everything on the back end on Azure for me to start actually adding some VMs. So let's go ahead and do that. I have scripts for that as well. I have to create the public IP address, the DNS entry for that public IP, and then the NIC to attach it to the back, and the VM as well. And this script is doing a lot of the heavy lifting, utilizing this Azure Utils file in order to create the specific VM. Now, of interest here is for a given file, when we do the libratization, we parse it, we're capturing the default values, but you could change these for any given workflow. So we call those design parameters. So at the top right here, I can click on that button there. And on the left here, you'll see the highlighted values that I've specified that are actually variables that I would like to be replaced in this file. But over here on the right-hand side, you'll see that I can just click in here and modify this to whatever I needed for these specific variables for this specific run. Now, in this case, this is exactly what I want, so I'm going to go ahead and save it. But you could change this if you wanted to, and I'm going to give this a name. So this is just going to be create single VM. And we're going to go ahead and save that. And now I have my workflow here. And I'm going to go ahead now and compile it. So when I compile it, it's taking all those design parameters for each one of the individual files and is doing the variable replacement for each of the different files. And it's going to generate at the end here, once it comes back. We also will package up with this what we call an orchestration script. And that orchestration script is a script that we create for you automatically that maintains the ordering of all these scripts that you have specified inside of your workflow. And here you can see the 2 utility dependency files here are coming along for the ride, but we also have all the other files here with their variable replacements completed and all done. Now, what you would do is you would take this, you would download all, it would give you a zip file of all these scripts put together, and you could place this wherever you needed to on your target. And so you place this on your target platform and you run it there. So let's see an example of that. So here is my target platform. So I'm basically in a Python virtual environment. And in here, I have my create single VM, and I run the orchestration script that we generated. And I've added some logging here to help us through that. So you can see that it's doing each one of the individual steps one by one. And we definitely get a public IP address here for the deployment. And this took about a minute and a half, a little bit less than a minute and a half. If I go to this public IP, we shall see that it is actually up and working. And it has this little text string here. So I've modified this HTTP server to actually get a string in here, which we'll see this in a little bit. But for example, this could be like a SQL server that was deployed. So something I do want to note is related to the orchestration scripts real quick, is right down here is where it's going to be assigned. So right now it's set to Python because most of my scripts are Python in this example. But you could make the orchestration script Bash, PowerShell, Java, whatever you needed to for your specific target. And these are the ones that we support right now, but we can add some in the future if necessary. And I wanted to make note that we are language agnostic. So I can mix and match different script types in here, so different languages. So an example of that is if I go over to my examples over here. Oh, no, I'm sorry. That was on a different account. I can show that to y'all at the end. to show you all an example of how we can mix and match languages. Because once we libretize them, they now become agnostic to one another. And our orchestration is able to handle each of those different languages appropriately. And so now that we've done the single, let's start focusing on the multi. And this becomes a dataset problem. So in this Excel spreadsheet, at the top, I have variables that I have in my files. So all the different variables. And the ones that are not highlighted or bolded are the ones that will be consistent or the same throughout each one of them. So these are all going to be the same values. Now, each one of these rows represents a VM that I'm going to deploy. Now, the ones that are bold, however, are the ones that need to change. So again, the different naming that I'm doing for each one of the VMs, those would need to change. But over here on the right-hand side is really interesting. So here's the Docker image I'm using. So that's the HTTP one. But here's the Docker message I was talking about. So this gives you an example that I could be deploying 3 SQL servers, 2 domain controllers, ISS servers, dev and staging servers. So I can have this all mapped out. I've also provided details here on related to the machine. So here is the details related to the different type of server that I'm running for the VM. So in this case, Ubuntu, but you could run Windows or whatever you needed to, and the specific version you wanted to. And then I've also provided the VM size here. So you can see how you can manipulate each one of these VMs to have a specific size if needed to, as an example. Now, let's ingest this into our tool. So I'm going to go back to our the first one that we looked at, which is where we were ingesting all this. And I'm going to ingest that Excel file as a CSV. So let me pull the CSV in. So there's our data. I'll go ahead and upload that. And so we treat this like any other file. I'll go ahead and upload it or load it up and click parse. Now, instead of this view, I want to parse it to a data set. So we have another button down here that says parse to a data set. So I'll click that. Now I get this table view of all the data inside of there. Now, in this tool, you can add columns, you can add rows, or you can even add a row with a copy of the last row's data. So you don't have to do all that manual entry for a lot of the values if there's only some that you need to actually manipulate. So this will allow you quick access to do that. And you can also remove columns if you needed to. And you can actually modify the data in here as well if you needed to, whenever you were importing it and saving it as a data set. But all this is the data I need, so I'm going to go ahead and save it. And that's also going to become a library. So now this library can be used inside of our tool in a very cool way. So let me show you all back at the other tool now that we've ingested that. We'll actually go and use it. So back over to our single VM, in my libraries here, I have the data set, which is right here. I'm going to click and drag it, put it right above where we created the just single VM. And then bam, this creates a looping structure, which for each row inside of that data set will basically run these individual scripts and do the variable replacements for each one of those automatically for you. Now, since this is in its own context, basically its own scope, I also need to provide the dependencies one more time to this group right here so that they have all the scripts that they need. And so what I would then do is click Save As. So you can see how you can build across different workspace or workflows. So you can start on one workflow, then that morphs into other workflows and so on and so forth. So I'll call this a multi-VM, create multi-VM. Oop, if I can spell. Go ahead and save that. So now we have the create multi, and I will compile this at the end. This one takes a little bit longer just because of so many different runs that it's doing. But let's see the output for this one. So here in this instance, it took about 8.5 minutes for this to finish for running all 12. I've added some more logging in here so we can actually see the individual runs that we're doing. And here you'll see all the individual IP addresses that are happening. And you'll see that the runs are just specifically that block of deploying the VM and running the Docker image over there. And if I scroll to the very top, we'll see that we're just doing the provisioning of all the backend pieces just once, which is exactly what we want inside of there. Now, I'm pretty sure y'all don't want me to go through each one of these IP addresses. So in real time, we're going to pull this data. I wrote a little verifier, a validator for all these. So I've added this as a log for this here with all that data, and it's going to scrape all these individual IPs. So if I go over to my little validator and run that, it's going to go through each one of those IPs that it found inside of that log, and it's going to make sure that each one of them is returning a value and is returning the appropriate string that was shown inside of the Excel spreadsheet. So not only are we seeing that they're up, but they also, each of them have the specific text that we associated with them. But that's what that's doing. So.
Okay, hey Jason, real quick, let me just jump in and just sort of summarize what you just showed and what you just saw before we get to how this is used by an organization and the sharing. But for, again, you might not be working in cloud, you might not be using Azure, maybe AWS, maybe GCP, whatever, or you may not even be in cloud at all, you may be in network or you may be in security. But if you or your team or anybody in your organization does use scripts, and again, not just Python, PowerShell or Bash, or any combination of those, but any kind of script to deploy technologies. That's network security, that's you name it. Think about how this could be utilized for common and repetitive tasks. We just built a golden copy that allows for somebody to do this exact task n number of times in less than a minute each, right? So we did 12 deployments here of VMs. They ran in serial, and a lot of it has to do with how long it takes, Azure to process it. We can also run in parallel, but ran this in serial, and it took 8.5 minutes to deploy 12. If you were doing 1,000 servers or 200 switches or whatever as part of your work group workflow, it's possible to create golden copies for each of those tasks and allow your teams to do it. Okay, so that was just my summary. So Jason, back to you.
Right. So now let's share this. So if I go back over to our workflows, I have my two workflows here, the single and the multi. And so, yeah, like he was saying, these are now our golden copies. So let's basically share this to the group. So we have a little button here for promoting to group. So you can see it here on the workflow. And if I move back over to libraries, you'll also see it on the libraries as well. But let's just demonstrate it with the workflows. So if I do the multi, so it'll bring me up this little window that says promote to group. And so here are the different groups that I'm actually a part of. So I'm going to add this to our webinar group. And so here at the very top directory, I can actually add a different folder. So call it demo, and I'll add this workflow up there and promote it up. Now, if I go over to the shared repository and go over to workflows, so over here on the top right, you'll see which group you're looking at right now. If I click that, I'll get the same different pull down. I'll click webinar, and then there's those folders we saw, and then there's the demo. And I can click in here, and there's exactly the workflow that I had actually just pushed up. So people can actually leverage it. And people can actually incorporate that in their own workflows too, because we also support workflow of workflows, for example. So you can incorporate all this logic into another workflow in case you wanted to. But
right, for like say tasks that have multivariant, multi sort of pieces to it, you can have a workflow calling on another workflow within a workflow. So that's why we call it workflow of workflows.
And before I sign off back to Scott, let me show y'all something real cool. So I showed y'all from an individual script the design parameters. If I click the script, I'm now at the workflow level, and I can see the design parameters for everything inside this workflow. If I click design parameters, you'll see the grouping of all the same variable. So for example, location across all the different files within this workflow. If I wanted to consolidate this and change it, so I say Central US to like East, that will change that variable value for each one of these files in a very, very fast and easy way. And so this is really the power of being able to use the design parameters, is that I can change these names however I want for a given compile. And then these values will be reflected once we compile it again, and all these files would actually have their values changed. So wanted to point that out, that you don't have to go individually file by file, but you can also do it from the workflow level. But with that, and in case I'm not missing anything, I will hand it back over to Scott.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Really appreciate you going through that. Hopefully it made sense, and that it showed the value of what we built in the Adept tool, which allows for automation and standardization of processes for groups and teams. You can imagine when Jason promoted to a group that you could have a network group, you could have a cloud team, you could have even specifically an Azure team versus an AWS team. And within each of those, for again, your most common and repetitive tasks that you would want to standardize, you can have a golden copy for each that is, let's say, maintained and built and generated by your subject matter expert, who then shares it to the rest of the team for use amongst the team. It will save tons of time. We've seen it up to 90% savings in time with respect to manual substitution, reuse of existing scripts and existing, let's say, workflows and libraries and things, and the ability for, let's say, non-subject matter experts to actually do some of the work that today your subject matter experts, must do as a result of some of the complexity of script deployment. So that's kind of it. I'll throw it back to Kristen to see if we have any questions, but otherwise, we're kind of at the bottom of the hour, and it's kind of the time we allotted for this. I think we might have another 10 to 15 minutes.
No questions, but thank you everybody for joining. And yeah, you can always find more info on our website or reach out to us on LinkedIn. We'd be happy to set up a demo and learn more about what you need from an automation strategy. And thank you so much.
Yep. Thanks all for coming, and